Hi, I'm Richard. Hi, I'm Richard Byrne. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can start a brand new podcast by using Spotify for podcasters. Let's go ahead and take a look at how to do this right now. So I'm here at podcasters.spotify.com, and let's go ahead and sign up, and we want to start a brand new podcast. And you can see here we can sign up by filling in that form and then proving we're not robots. So I've filled in the form and I'm going to sign up. And here we are in the new screen for my Spotify for Podcasters account. And let's make our first episode right now. And this is really easy to do. You can simply click to record your audio and start recording your podcast right out of the gate. Or if you've already recorded in an external tool, you can upload your audio and add that into your podcast. But you'll notice down here, we also have some things for adding transitions between segments of your podcast. So here's how it works. Let's start by just recording a little welcome. And you can see I'm going to use my default MacBook Air microphone for now. And let's go and record it. Welcome to the first episode of my brand new podcast. This podcast is going to be called the EdTech Fitness Podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to talk to folks who are interested in education, technology, and fitness, and the intersection of all three of those things. Now, I've recorded that little segment. I'm going to rename it. Call it Intro to Episode 1. Let's make sure I save that. Intro to Episode 1. And now I'm going to add that to my episode over here on the right-hand side. Now I mentioned there's some transitions. So let's click on transitions and we can listen to this audio. And if I want to use that as the transition between segments, I'll add it to my episode. Now I'll go back over here to the record button and record the next part of my first episode of my podcast. I have a dream list of guests that I'd love to have on my podcast, but none of them are available today. So instead, it's just going to be me talking, and perhaps my puppy will make his voice heard a time or two on the podcast as well. And so you can see there, I've recorded another little segment. And I'm going to rename that segment. I'll just call it Part 2. So let's click that little icon to rename it. And we'll call it Episode 1, Part 2. And let's add that in to the episode. And I can just repeat that process as many times as I want until I'm done recording the episode for my podcast. And of course, you can reuse any of these elements because they'll show up in your library over here. So those elements are now part of my library that I can reuse over and over. So if I want to record an intro that I'm going to use for every single episode, or an outro that I'm going to use for every single episode, I can record that, save it in my library, and then reuse it for every episode. Now, if I want to preview it, let's go ahead and preview that episode, and I can play it back. And if I like what I hear, well, let's save that episode. Now, before I publish this, of course, I need to verify my email address so that Spotify for Podcasters doesn't think I'm just a spammer or a random person who's doing this for bad purposes. So I'm going to verify my email address. then we're going to come back and publish this podcast. So you can see here, I've now verified my email account, and let's go ahead and give this episode a title. Let's call it Episode 1, the intro to the EdTech Fitness Podcast. Now, I'll put my description in here and say, like the title says, this is the intro to what I hope will be a fun and successful podcast. Helps to spell things correctly. There we go. And now we can publish it immediately or schedule it to appear at a later time. Let's go ahead and publish it. And my podcast name is going to be called the EdTech Fitness Podcast. A podcast about the intersection of education, technology, and fitness. And let's put a podcast category in here. Let's go down here and say education. And my podcast language is going to be in English. And let's continue it. We can add some cover art or let Spotify for Podcasters pick something for me. We can always go back and change it later. But for now, I'm going to use that little photograph from Unsplash that Spotify for Podcasters chose for me. And I'm going to use the default text and color scheme. I like that one. Now, of course, I can go back in and change that after the fact if I want to, but for now, I'm happy with that cover art, and I'm going to move on to publishing right now. This will make it available on Spotify, and once my podcast is established, I'll be able to distribute it to other podcast platforms from here. And here we go. And we can see there it is available on Spotify right now and Spotify for Podcasters. And you can see there's other options there for distribution, including Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, among many others. So that's how you can create a brand new podcast by using Spotify for Podcasters. As always, for more things like this, please visit practicaledtech.com, freetechforteachers.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or visit edtechfitness.com, where I will have a podcast in the near future.